You're welcome to be seated. I read an interview this week with a man in Helsinki, Finland. He had been housed for almost a year. Finland pioneered the housing first response to homelessness. First, give people a warm, safe place to live, and then work together on all the other healing that needs to take place. This man, Veihi Hinka, was sharing about being housed again, and he said he really enjoys showering. When the reporter asked what he prefers, warm showers, cold showers, long showers, short showers, Veihi paused and considered, and his gaze wandered for a minute. And then he said, so I don't totally understand the question. I just really like showering, all kinds. The reporter's impression was that Veihi's time without a home, surviving, narrowing his focus, living also in the darkness of addiction, had made him unfamiliar with people taking an interest in his life, and also unaccustomed to deciding his own likes and dislikes. So stay with me for a minute. This sounded to me like Jesus. Sounded like Jesus talking about drawing us out from the darkness of evil deeds to the light of God's love. And I don't mean a one-to-one correlation. I'm not calling Veihi evil for being homeless or for suffering addiction, okay? But you remember how John's gospel account opens? This is in John. This is the 3rd chapter of John. It opens when John says, "The Word became flesh and lived among us. What has come into being through him was life, and the life was the light of all people." John is a poet. And if that word doesn't have gravitas to you, we're not talking about some kind of airy poetry. John's poetry claims both the spirit and the body, and it proclaims that God is saturating all of us with his light and life. So in today's gospel, Jesus is continuing to speak in that poetic mode when he comes to the topic of condemnation and salvation. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. I had this image of myself in prayer, welcoming God's light. And then I imagined someone interviewing me. What kind of prayer do you like best, Reed? Short prayers, long prayers, spontaneous, pre-written? And I noticed that part of myself that could only respond, I just like God's light, all kinds. 32 years into Christian practice, but still with an element of light good, dark bad. I realized that just as I hope and imagine that Veihi Hinka will learn more about what he truly loves about showers, I can hope for a day when I have a more textured personal relationship with God's light. John's use of poetry, even in speaking about and guiding us in this life or death choice, it shouldn't surprise a worshiper in the Episcopal Church. Our worship follows Jesus's lead here. We begin and end worship in the poetry of song. Our prayers are poetic. We read Psalms every Sunday and morning and evening in our daily prayers. We understand that the beauty of the places where we worship and the beauty of the earth are not just helpful to our relationship with God, they're part of our relationship with God. And yet, as soon as a text speaks these theological words like salvation, condemnation, judgment, my experience is that we immediately pop up just into the brain. We go to a solely cerebral engagement with those topics. God as math equation. John's poetry instead, John invites us to keep our whole bodies engaged when we say salvation and when we say condemnation, like a shower running over us. Like a shower running over us. This God relationship, John and Jesus proclaim, it includes the physicality of ourselves. Jesus said, "For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light." There's a movement, and there's something you can see in that. They do not come to the light so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light. We come and we stand by Jesus Christ so that in the light that's pouring off of him, it may be clearly seen that our deeds have been done in God. I want to preserve John's poetic invitation, so I'm hesitant to speak too concretely here. But I mean something like, hey, Vehi's skin has receptors that can distinguish hot and cold, just like yours and mine. Someday, his brain, he may come to prefer one or the other. He may have more endorphins during one shower or the other as his desires mature, as he decides who he is in his new freedom, housed. And St. John causes me to understand that you and I also have receptors. We have a distinguishing capacity for the Spirit of God's light. And we might mature in that sensitivity ourselves. And for real life, for living real life, that poetic relationship with God's light is so much more helpful than a set of rules, good, bad. I was at a school board meeting yesterday. Some of you, if you were in this town, you might have been too, at a school board meeting in which there was debate taking place whether to change our format of voting from an all-in-one conversation and vote of school board meeting as it is, or to move to a separate deliberative session and voting separate times format called SB2. And people spoke passionately for both of these formats. But what became obvious was that neither of them was right or wrong. You couldn't apply those words to the two possibilities. You couldn't just say good, bad. In my estimation, the best comments, both for and against, were the ones in which someone stepped up to the microphone and a kind of poetic light shone through what they said out loud. In those comments, the speaker was holding in one hand our best try at legislative possibilities, of which we were talking about just two. And in the other hand, they were holding, and you could hear in them, the best speakers, you could hear their desire to sustain the creative life of our children. And you could hear their holding a desire to heal the hurt of taxation that is burdening people. And I know because I talked to other people, I know I wasn't alone in feeling there were 500 people in this gymnasium, and you could feel when three speakers got up in a row and were only holding their hope was only this legislative possibilities, either one. You could feel the tension in the room and everybody get stretched taut in their spirits. And then, thanks be to God, a speaker would come up and who brought up hope in the light. And you could feel the room expand again and people's breath come back, whether they were speaking for or against what you agreed with personally. Whatever Hopkinton chooses for its format this year and the next, I guarantee that format is not going to heal what was taking place in that room. What will heal the conversation in this town about our schools is people who want to live in the light. And we'll create that beyond the format of the school board meeting. I still voted, okay? But salvation isn't coming through that vote alone. So when we hear Jesus speak today in the text of condemnation and salvation, a solely cerebral response to that invitation, it sets us up to get nothing from this text. But a poetic body and spirit response, that gives us this expansive world. God's judgment is known in that people are offered light but choose darkness. Okay. I mean, I feel like when we read that text, we're triggered to like get some distance from it. Oh no, here comes Jesus to condemn most of us, and 5 of us will manage to find the light. But that's the fearful get in our brains response. Come with your whole body and hear. What I felt in the gymnasium yesterday was 500 people, or maybe 450 of the people there who could feel the light, were responding to that, who wanted to go towards the light. And going with St. John and staying with his poetry, we benefit from knowing that light by name, Jesus Christ. When we follow this text all the way through and we remember where John began his gospel, we realize how expansive the invitation is. I believe that if Vehi is housed for another year or another decade, he will find richer answers about what brings him joy. I believe that if I live another year or a decade housed in the church, I will find richer answers about prayer. During his first summer housed, Vehi took 10 showers a day. Really, 10. And he still didn't understand the question about showers. So I imagine that after nearly weekly Eucharist for 30 years, I could still discover something more about the richness of God's light. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. And God gave to us a capacity to feel eternal life and the faculties to move toward it. If 3 weeks here into Lent, there is no concrete Lenten practice that has taken hold in you, maybe try instead walking the next 3 weeks in the spirit of God's poetry.